A man arrived at an airport. He walked calmly through the terminal. Nothing about him stood out. Nothing felt unusual. He carried himself like any other traveler. Composed. Routine. Forgettable. He approached the immigration counter, placed his passport on the desk, and waited. For a moment, everything was normal. Then the officer paused. Not long, just enough to notice something was off. He looked at the passport again, then at the man, then back at the document. And in that moment, everything changed, because the country printed on that passport does not exist. And within 24 hours, that man was gone. No records, no trace, no explanation. Take a second and really think about that. A man appears, with valid documents, with a complete identity, and then disappears, like he was never there. This is not fiction. This is a real investigation. My name is the Archivist, and what you are about to hear is a case file. A case that challenges identity, geography, and reality itself. This is Case 003. The Man from Taured. Picture this. You are standing in line at airport security. You hand over your passport. Everything feels routine, predictable, controlled. Then the officer pauses, looks at the document, looks at you, calls someone else, and suddenly, the room feels different. People are watching. The air feels heavier. And just like that, you are no longer a traveler. You are a problem. Because according to your passport, you come from a country that shouldn't exist. What would you do? Seriously, would you question yourself? Or would you question the world around you? Because in this case, that question becomes everything. The year was 1954, Tokyo, Japan, a time when the world was still recovering, rebuilding, reconnecting. Air travel was becoming more accessible, but it was still tightly controlled. Airports were not just transit hubs. They were checkpoints, places where identity was verified with precision. Documents mattered. Accuracy mattered. Because in a world shaped by war and uncertainty, trust was limited on what seemed like an ordinary day. A man arrived at Haneda Airport. He did not draw attention. He was not nervous. He was not rushed. He moved like someone who had done this many times before. Confident, familiar, comfortable. He wore a tailored coat, carried himself with quiet assurance. Nothing about him suggested deception. Nothing about him suggested danger. Until immigration officers examined his passport. At first glance, everything looked legitimate. The document was clean, well-maintained, properly stamped. It showed travel history, international movement. It told a story of a man who had been places, who had crossed borders, who belonged somewhere. But then, they noticed something, a detail so small, yet so impossible. His country of origin. Taured. The officers exchanged looks. They checked again, spelled it out. Taured. No one recognized it. Not the junior officers. Not the supervisors. No one. So they did what made sense. They asked him, "Where is Taured?" And this is where the situation shifts. Because the man did not hesitate. He did not stutter. He did not panic. He looked at them, like they were the ones asking the wrong question. He calmly explained that Taured was in Europe. And not just recently, it had existed for centuries. A recognized nation, with history, with borders. At this point, the officers assumed confusion, maybe a translation issue, maybe a misunderstanding. So they brought out a map, a detailed map of Europe, and asked him to point to his country. Without hesitation, he pointed, direct. Confident, to a location known as Andorra, a real country, but not Taured. The officers corrected him. They explained that this was Andorra, a small country between France and Spain. But the man did not accept this. He became visibly frustrated, not aggressively, but firmly. He insisted they were wrong. That location was Taured, that it had always been Taured, and that Andorra did not exist. But here is where the case takes a turn. He was not guessing. He was not uncertain. He was absolutely convinced. And that level of certainty changes everything. Because now, this is not confusion. This is not a simple mistake. This is a conflict between realities. And what investigators discovered next made the situation even more unsettling. The officers took the man aside. The tone changed. This was no longer routine. This was an investigation. They needed to verify his identity. So they examined his documents more closely. Every page, every stamp, every detail, and everything checked out. The passport was not crude, not poorly made. It was detailed, professional, authentic. It contained official markings, consistent patterns. It passed every visual inspection. But it didn't stop there. The stamps inside the passport were real. Some of them were verified, matched against records, and confirmed, which leads to a critical point. If this passport was fake, it was created with a level of precision that was almost impossible for that time. But it gets even more complex. The man was carrying additional documents. Business papers, company references, contacts in Tokyo. He even had currency from multiple countries. Nothing about him suggested fraud. Nothing suggested desperation. He was calm, composed, but also increasingly frustrated. From his perspective, he had done nothing wrong. He had followed the rules, presented valid identification, and now he was being treated like a suspect. At one point, he made a statement that would later be recorded. "You are the ones who are mistaken, not me." Take a moment. Really think about that statement, because it reveals something important. He did not see himself as confused. He saw himself as correct, and everyone else as wrong. The officers continued their investigation. They asked about his travel history. He stated that he had visited Japan before, several times, for business, routine trips. But when records were checked, there was nothing. No entries, no logs, no evidence. It was as if those trips had never happened. At this point, the situation escalated. This was no longer about a strange passport. This was about a man who seemed to exist outside of recorded reality. He was detained, not imprisoned, but placed under controlled supervision. He was moved to a nearby hotel, a secure room. Guards were stationed outside. The goal was simple: keep him contained, continue the investigation, understand who he was. But what happened next does not follow logic. By now, the case had drawn serious attention because it did not fit any known pattern. There was no clear explanation, no obvious motive, no logical conclusion. Investigators began breaking it down, step by step, starting with the passport. Could it have been forged? Possibly, but if it was far ahead of its time. The materials, the printing, the ink consistency, everything suggested authenticity. Then came the psychological analysis. Was the man experiencing a delusion, a condition that altered his perception of reality? It was considered. But there was a problem. Delusions are often inconsistent. They shift. They break under pressure. This did not. His story remained stable. Every answer aligned. Every detail matched. From an analytical perspective, this level of consistency is extremely rare. This case is still referenced in investigative psychology today because it challenges standard patterns of behavior. Then there was the geopolitical angle. The 1950s were marked by Cold War tensions. Espionage was common. False identities existed. But even then, creating an entirely fictional country would only increase risk, not reduce it, which makes the choice of Taured difficult to explain, unless he genuinely believed it existed. Human perception is not absolute. It is constructed, built from memory, experience, belief, which means two people can observe the same reality and interpret it completely differently. And just when investigators thought they were close to understanding the situation, everything changed. The man was placed in a secure hotel room. Guards outside, controlled environment. There was no easy way out. Everything was monitored. Everything was accounted for. Until the next morning. He was gone. No forced entry. No broken windows. No signs of struggle. Just gone. The room was intact, undisturbed, except for one thing. He was no longer there. And neither were his belongings. The passport, the documents, everything disappeared with him. As if he had never existed. So what happened? There are several theories. Some investigators believe this was an advanced case of identity fraud, a deception so precise, it bypassed systems entirely. Others suggest a psychological anomaly, a man whose perception of reality did not align with ours. But then, there is the theory that remains uncomfortable. What if he was telling the truth? What if he came from a reality slightly different from ours? A world where Taured exists, where Andorra does not. A world almost identical, but not quite. Because if that is true, then from his perspective, he was never wrong. We were. And maybe he did not disappear. He simply returned to a place we cannot see or understand. So let me ask you something. If someone walked into your world tomorrow with proof that your reality is incorrect, would you believe them? Or would you reject them? Because in 1954, that decision may have already been made, and we may never know what really happened to the man from Taured. I will see you in the next investigation.